In the late 1960s, Philadelphia was alive with soul, R&B, and rock. It was here that two young musicians, Daryl Hall and John Oates, first crossed paths. Both were college students, deeply in love with music, and both had been playing in local bands. Their first meeting wasn't planned. In fact, it happened by accident when a fight broke out at a dance competition they were attending. They found themselves escaping together in the same elevator. Fate had done its work. Daryl was tall, blonde, and soulful, with a voice that carried echoes of Motown and gospel. John was smaller, with dark hair and a sharp sense of melody and arrangement. Their backgrounds were different, but they shared one passion, blending genres. They both loved doo-wop, folk, rock, and soul. It was unusual at the time to cross so many musical borders, but they didn't care. That chance meeting began a friendship that would grow into one of the most successful duos in music history. But in those early years, they were just two young dreamers trying to figure out how to make their mark. They had no idea they would become Hall Oates. Forming a partnership was one thing. Making the world pay attention was another. In the early 1970s, Hall Oates signed their first record deal with Atlantic Records. But success didn't come easy. Their first albums, including Hall Oates and Abandoned Luncheonette, were filled with creativity but didn't sell as well as they hoped. Still, hidden on Abandoned Luncheonette was She's Gone, a song that would later become a hit when re-released. At first, though, the world barely noticed. Critics praised the duo for their unique blend of rock, R&B, and soul, but radio stations didn't quite know what to do with them. Were they pop, rock, soul? They were everything at once. This was the first sign of what Daryl later called their lethal ability to experiment. They were never afraid to test boundaries. When others stuck to one formula, Hall Oates mixed everything together, creating something new. But those years were tough. They lived in small apartments, toured constantly, and faced rejection after rejection. Many would have quit, but Hall Oates believed they had something special, and they refused to give up. By the mid-1970s, Hall Oates realized they needed to sharpen their identity. They had the talent, but the industry wanted hits. So they began experimenting even more boldly. Daryl's voice became the centerpiece, soulful, powerful, and unmistakable. John provided the structure, the harmonies, and the musical foundation. Their song Sarah Smile, inspired by Daryl's girlfriend, finally broke through in 1976. It climbed the charts and introduced them to a wider audience. For the first time, they tasted real success. Soon after, Rich Girl followed, giving them their first #1 hit. Fans loved their mix of silky vocals, pop hooks, and soul grooves. But behind the scenes, Hall Oates were still searching. They didn't want to be stuck in one category. They wanted to keep experimenting with funk, rock, and even new wave sounds. What made them different was their willingness to take risks. Instead of following trends, they bent them. They understood both the streets of Philadelphia soul and the polished world of pop. This combination would eventually give them one of the most powerful runs of hits the 1980s had ever seen. The late 1970s set the stage for what was coming, with Sarah Smile and Rich Girl proving they could deliver hits. Hall Oates entered the 1980s ready for domination. The rise of MTV gave them the perfect platform. Their look, Daryl's golden hair and John's mustache and sharp style, was instantly recognizable. They began to release a string of albums that showed off their experimentation at full force. Voices in 1980 brought Kiss on My List, a massive hit that climbed to #1. Then came Private Eyes with the unforgettable title track and I Can't Go For That, No Can Do, a song that blurred the lines between pop, soul, and funk. Each release seemed to outdo the last. They weren't just riding the wave of the 80s, they were helping shape it. Their sound was fresh, modern, and irresistibly catchy, while still deeply rooted in rhythm and blues. Hall Oates had finally found the formula, constant reinvention. And it worked. The small duo from Philadelphia was now standing at the very top of the pop music world. When asked years later how they managed to stay ahead, Daryl Hall summed it up with one phrase: "We had a lethal ability to experiment." That wasn't just a clever line, it was the truth. Unlike many bands who stuck to one sound, Hall Oates reinvented themselves with every album. They pulled from Motown, doo-wop, folk, soul, rock, new wave, and even hip-hop rhythms. They weren't afraid to mix and match until something clicked. I Can't Go For That is the perfect example. The song was built on a drum machine groove and a smooth bass line, far from the standard rock sound of the time. Amazingly, the song didn't just top the pop charts, it also climbed the R&B charts. It showed that their music could cross boundaries, appealing to audiences everywhere. Experimentation was risky. It could have easily failed, but for Hall Oates, it was their secret weapon. They didn't see genres as walls. They saw them as doors they could walk through. That attitude made them unstoppable in the 1980s, when they became the most successful duo in history. From 1981 to 1985, Hall Oates were on fire. Every album, every single, seemed to become a smash hit. Maneater, Private Eyes, Out of Touch, You Make My Dreams. The list went on and on. What made these songs stand out wasn't just the catchy melodies. It was the production. They used synthesizers, drum machines, and layered vocals in new ways. They made music that sounded modern, but still soulful. Their songs had energy, groove, and emotion, all packed into 3 minutes. They also mastered the music video era. MTV loved them, and their quirky videos helped cement their image. They weren't flashy like some 80s stars, but their music spoke louder than anything else. Hall Oates weren't just popular, they were everywhere. Radio, TV, concerts, they dominated it all. They became the soundtrack of the 80s with their songs played at parties, in cars, and on dance floors across the world. It was the peak of their career, but also the period that tested them most. Fame brought pressure, and constant success demanded even more creativity. The duo kept pushing forward, determined not to lose their edge. With success came new challenges. By the mid-1980s, the pace of recording, touring, and promoting was exhausting. Hall Oates had been working almost non-stop for over a decade. Tensions began to rise, not just between the duo, but also within themselves. Daryl Hall, with his powerful voice, became the more visible frontman. Some critics began calling them Daryl Hall, that other guy. John Oates, though crucial to their sound, sometimes felt overshadowed. This created quiet friction. Meanwhile, the music industry was changing. New styles like hip-hop and electronic dance were rising fast. The duo wondered if their sound could keep up. Their later albums of the 80s didn't match the same explosive success as before, though they still produced strong hits. Daryl also pursued solo projects, releasing his own material. John explored production and songwriting outside the duo. They never officially broke up, but their partnership cooled. The cracks didn't mean the end, but after years of being at the very top, Hall Oates were finally slowing down. Still, their bond and their ability to experiment would eventually bring them back together again. The 1990s were a quieter era for Hall Oates. Musical tastes shifted, and grunge, hip-hop, and alternative rock dominated the charts. For many 80s icons, it was the end of the road. But Hall Oates weren't ready to disappear. They reinvented themselves once again. Instead of chasing trends, they went back to their roots: soul, R&B, and acoustic-driven performances. They toured smaller venues, connecting with loyal fans who never stopped loving their music. Albums like Change of Season in 1990 showed they could still write strong songs, and when the nostalgia wave for 80s music began to rise in the late 90s, Hall Oates found themselves back in demand. Their music had aged well. Songs like You Make My Dreams became timeless anthems, rediscovered by younger generations. Most importantly, they remembered what made them special. Their chemistry, built on decades of friendship and collaboration, was still alive. They didn't need to chase hits anymore. They only needed to keep doing what they had always done: experiment, perform, and connect. The 90s proved Hall Oates weren't just a duo of the past. They were legends still evolving. By the 2000s, Hall Oates were no longer fighting for relevance. They were celebrated as icons. Their influence could be heard in countless artists, from pop stars to R&B singers. Sampling and hip-hop also brought their songs back to life, introducing them to younger fans. Daryl launched Live from Daryl's House, a show where he performed with artists from every genre. It highlighted what made him great: collaboration and experimentation. John continued writing, producing, and performing, often reminding people that while he wasn't always in the spotlight, his fingerprints were all over their sound. In 2014, Oates were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was recognition long overdue. They had sold more records than any other duo in history, with 6 #1 hits and dozens of top singles. Their blend of rock and soul had left a permanent mark on music. Most importantly, they had done it together. Through ups and downs, fame and struggles, their friendship endured. And at the core of it all was that same spark from their first meeting in Philadelphia, the belief that experimenting could change everything. Today, Oates are more than just a band from the 70s and 80s. They are proof of what happens when artists refuse to be boxed in. Their music is streamed by millions, their hits appear in movies and commercials, and You Make My Dreams continues to fill dance floors at weddings around the world. What makes their story powerful is not just the success, but how they achieved it. They never stayed still. They mixed genres, reinvented their sound, and trusted their instincts. That lethal ability to experiment became the reason their music still feels fresh decades later. For Daryl and John Oates, music was never about chasing trends. It was about creating something new out of the familiar, something soulful out of the ordinary. That's why their legacy endures. From an elevator escape in Philadelphia to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, their journey is a reminder that great art comes from risk-taking. Oates dared to experiment, and in doing so, they became one of the greatest duos in music history.